Hey y'all, you're listening to Criminalist Behavior Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the 1920s infamous New Orleans trunk murders. If this is your first time listening, hi, my name is Sarah Soudier and I'm your host for Criminalist Behavior Podcast. I want to thank you for listening to our show and I hope you enjoy it. So, trigger warning, this episode is very graphic. And it includes descriptions of physical violence against adults. Listener discretion is advised. If blood and gore is not your thing, then you might want to skip this episode because this one is very gruesome. I'm going to go ahead and give you a little background of the era of this time so you can just get a little idea of what it was like in the 20th century prior to me going over this case. So, the French Quarter was part of a working class neighborhood that was populated by immigrants. It had a collection of old buildings, and it's still like that to this day. And it attracted bohemians like Sherwood Anderson, William Faulkner, Lyle Saxon, and other creatives who just wanted to immerse themselves in the atmosphere. And they took advantage of the low rents in the area. And less than a decade before, there was neighborhoods that was haunted by a case called the Axeman, which I will actually be covering that case in the near future. And that case is about someone who preyed on Italian immigrants. And crime was very, very growing in the French Quarter. There was an anthropologist named Olivier Lafarge who described the French Quarter as a decaying monument and a slum as rich as jambalaya or gumbo. Now, Louisiana is famous for the jambalaya and gumbo and their Creole food. And most of their once elegant buildings have been divided into the rich and the poor, but most notably the first and second generation of Sicilian immigrants who made up 80% of the population in the 1900s. And just after World War I, orders and riders began to move into the area around the Jackson Square. And like I said, they were attracted by cheap rent, the charm, and the colorful street life of the city. And although there was a few quarters, new residents were native New Orleans, most came from other places. So they weren't born and raised in New Orleans. Several of these people wrote for the city's newspaper, and one of the best known figures at this time was Swilling Spratling. He was a young artist on the architecture faculty at Tulane, and he was a roommate with William Faulkner, who was not yet a famous writer. He eventually became a self-published author of the book Sherwood Anderson and Other Famous Creoles, which pretty much described the city of New Orleans and how the scene looked. The Quarter was also known for its midday coffee and conversation. It was inexpensive Creole and Italian restaurants and an abundance of Prohibition era. The Le Petit Theater, which began as the drawing room players in uptown New Orleans, moved to the French Quarter, and it's still there today. And it also provided a setting where high society could mingle with the bohemians. Oh, I'm sorry. So in the mid-1920s, the Vieux Carré, or the French Quarter, was mostly made of a working class slum where people spoke French and English. Women lowered baskets to the street to different grocery areas who loaded them with food, and they added a pint of gin, which in the 1920s, this was the Prohibition area, and I'll get into that. Artists and writers had taken to the area, like I said, for the cheap rents, and the square itself was surrounded by hedges where they had a bunch of prostitutes taking their clients. Down from the French Quarter area, there was the working class whites. They made their living from the port, from sugar and timber mills, and from great slaughterhouses. So the social economic in this time was upriver in great homes on St. Charles and in the Garden District. There, maids waxed and got ready all the grand ballrooms by sitting on towels, sliding across the floor. And then on Canal Street, they had ice cream and sodas delivered to cars that were parked on the street. Kind of like Sonic, if you're familiar with that today, right? But this was in the olden days, right? So the Prohibition era, began in the 1920s. And this is when the 18th Amendment of the United States Constitution banned the manufacture, transportation, and sale of liquors. And this is when it went into effect. And despite this, the prohibition was very difficult to enforce, especially in the city of New Orleans. And, they got those bootleggers going on. And this increased the illegal production and sale of liquor, formerly known as your bootlegging, right? So they had illegal drinking spots and a rise in gang violence and organized crime. So now we're going to get to our case today, the infamous New Orleans trunk murders. So it was 1927. Henry and Theresa Moity lived at 715 Ursulines with his brother Joseph and his wife Leonide, plus their combined 5 children. So this is a total of 9 in this apartment, or this home for that matter. This home didn't have any furniture, and it was about 1,000 square foot. It wasn't very comfortable living. 1,000 square foot, 9 people. Hailing from Iberia, Louisiana, there was a population of 6,000 people, and they hoped to find more opportunity in the city, but the brothers worked mostly odd jobs, doing their best to provide for their family. The rent was always late. There was never enough food on the table, and things were just pretty bad. It wasn't easy going as they thought they would have. They moved to New Orleans from New Iberia in hopes of finding more opportunities, but they'd just been unsuccessful. The brothers, Henry and Joseph, struggled to pay all their bills, and one night, Theresa, which was Henry's wife, she flashed a $5 bill, which is worth about $70 in today's money, at her husband, and she told him that she knew how to make more money than he ever could. So she was pretty much provoking her husband, Henry, and she was insinuating that she was flirting with other men to gain their favor and get paid by them. So Henry was already jealous, and seeing different men all around every corner, he grew into a rage. But he said he was going to forgive her if she would just be the, quotation, good wife. Now, in Henry's eyes, what exactly is a good wife? Over the next few days, Henry continued to come home to a filthy house, no food, starving children. And regardless of how he talked with his wife and how often she promised to do better, things just constantly stayed exactly the same. At this point, Henry's brother Joe, already given up on his wife and their marriage, stated that there was alleged infidelity, and he just left his family. So Henry had been burdened with the responsibility of earning for the entire household on his own. So Henry was with the 5 children, his wife, and his brother's wife. So he was upset that his wife didn't make him dinner, and his brother Joe, like I said, already left his wife behind, and convinced that Theresa was also running around on... I'm sorry. That just fell. Theresa was running around on Henry. So Henry had been walking the streets all day, trying to drum up a business for a sign painting business that he wanted to start. When he returned home, he found that Theresa and his brother Joe's wife was packing up their suitcases and they were going to leave. He said that they taunted him and they decided to set up a shop, which he took to mean prostituting themselves out to the men. So, mortified Henry ran back out to the street, and there he decided to get drunk. He found the bottle and a whiskey jug, and he took at it. It might have been the height of the Prohibition era, but liquor was never hard to find in New Orleans. And that I could just about imagine, because New Orleans is the party city. Hello, Bourbon Street. So he also bought a sugarcane machete from the bartender. So that's odd. Why is a bartender selling machetes? But okay, to each his own, y'all. To each his own. So Henry then returned home, and he already found that both the women went asleep. He also seen that they packed their suitcases up for the next day, and he knew that they meant business, that they were truly about to leave the home. So Henry then decided to hack at his brother Joe's wife first, who was still asleep, and she never woke up. And Theresa woke up in the middle of that struggle, and she put up a fight, but she ended up getting succumbed to her injuries. I mean, hello, her husband's hacking at her with a machete. She literally just seen him kill Leonide, and now he's at her, attacking her with a machete, drunk, full of rage. So Henry then proceeded to behead the women and cut the rest of their bodies into small pieces that he would later stuff into 2 trunks. Where are the kids at, is my question. Where are the kids at while this is all happening, y'all? I can't even imagine. I'm sure there's screams and ruckus happening, and 5 children. I don't know their ages, but oh my God. Oh my God. So Henry then took it upon himself to remove his wife's wedding ring, and he pushed it into an open wound in her back. The floor of the apartment was covered in blood, fingers, and teeth, y'all. Can you imagine that bloody gore crime scene? You walk in full of blood. There's just fingers laying on the floor and teeth. Like, he did a number on them women. What would the kids, like, I know this is the 1920s, but I mean, waking up and seeing fingers and teeth and blood all over the floor, like, no. Henry then went to work, y'all. He left them like they were. He went to work after he beheaded and cut the woman into pieces and stuffing them into the trunks that he meant to leave. He wanted to take the trunks with him, but he ended up forgetting them over there. Okay. Henry stated that they fit nice up in the trunks. And he actually admitted to a reporter that he mashed that wedding ring in the back of Theresa's back and a gash that he gave her. I can't. I just can't. Fingers and teeth were left strewn on the floor, like I said, and blood was just everywhere. Henry then scooped up his kids. So the story is he left and he went to work, but I guess he left work and then came back realizing he forgot the suitcases with that chopped up women in it. And he came back and he got them kids. He called a cab, and then he dropped the kids off with his sister without saying anything of what happened or what he did. Then he fled to the swamps, y'all. He fled into the swamps. It was the fall 1927 when housekeeper Nettie Compass entered an apartment on 715 Ursulines Street near downtown New Orleans. She was originally going there to clean the home of the two women and their husbands, Henry and Joseph, but instead she stumbled into this horrific crime scene. After she discovered a pool of blood at her feet, she ran from the apartment screaming, and she caught the attention of two neighbors next door and the police. The police came to the apartment, and they found the various rooms to be spattered with gore. The mattress in the bedroom was soaked in blood. The bathroom cabinet was dripping with blood. And among all of this, discarded clothing and several severed fingers. The most horrific part of it all was found inside the closet. Police uncovered the two trunks that had been meticulously packed with carved up corpse of Theresa and Leonide. This is obviously something crazy. And this is where the story gets its name, how the women were chopped up and placed in the suitcases that they were literally packed up and leaving the next day with. So the description that the coroner at the time gave Dr. George Royling, he said the scene was brutal. He told reporters that the killer or killers bludgeoned these women with a lead billy club before using a machete to decapitate them and amputate their arms and legs. The police discovered a piece of implicating evidence at the scene, which was the golden wedding band buried in Theresa's bag. So when their coroner arrived, she stated, open quotations, "I charged into that apartment and cited several objects on the bed. Look," as she stated, holding up these objects, lady fingers. 4 fingers had been cut from a woman's hand. After placing the fingers back on the bed, she then moved to the second bedroom, where she found a second trunk. And she opened it, and it contained a second body, close quotations. I can't even imagine that crime scene, y'all. This is like something on like a Halloween prank where you just set up props, but this is real life. Oh. So in the bedroom cabinet, investigators discovered a manuscript, Lonnie's story, exhorting young girls to, quote, "Be careful, for marriage is a life sentence. Guess it was only my luck to be happy like this. So I warned others not to take the same risk," close quotations. So ironically, a rejection slip from a popular ladies magazine was right there, and it was smeared in blood. And from the scattered clues, they pieced the family's torrid tale. So the first step for investigators was to question the women's husbands, because the husbands are always the first suspect. I mean, we all know that. Joseph cooperated with the police, telling them that he'd been living at the sister's home after he caught Leonide cheating on him, and then he flew the coop. He said, "The hell with this, I'm out." Neighbors confirmed that the two couples often fought loud over money, infidelity, and drinking. So then the manhunt was on to find Henry. Henry was found 2 days later while trying to get out and make a getaway using a freight ship. He found a freight boat running through Bayou Lafourche, but the crew had seen the news, which was nationwide by then, and they were suspicious of Henry. They let him get on board anyway, and once they distinctively noticed this naked lady tattoo on him, they subdued him, and they waited for the police to get there. They already knew what was up. So Henry told a Norwegian sailor who had made him a watch that he butchered the women, but the story quickly fell apart, and Henry finally admitted to what he did. Henry attempted to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. Yay, I think you're freaking insane if you're chopping these people up like this. Your freaking wife, y'all. God dang. He tried leaning on the idea that two things that drove him to kill were whiskey and the infidelity of his wife and how she was coming at him, supposedly. So the jewelry was made of all males, and they couldn't decide if that was a valid defense or not. What? You couldn't decide if that's valid. I mean, hello? Hell no, it's not valid. What? And they compromised on a verdict of guilty without capital punishment, rejecting the prosecution's death penalty recommendation. So he got charged with 2 life sentences, y'all. Not a capital punishment. Not desecrating your remains. Like, what? So the initial conviction of Henry Moity was swift. Not only did he confess, but he also provided the gruesome details, y'all. He said he was in an alcohol-induced rage. He killed his wife, Theresa, because he suspected her of having an affair. And she neglected her motherly duties. And she planned to leave him and their children. He also believed that Leonide, his brother Joe's wife, had been a negative influence on his wife, so he killed her as well because she was guilty for being associated, y'all. Henry had previously been a butcher before he came to New Orleans, so he knew the method and motive, and he lined it up perfectly to convict himself in court. Like I said, he was given 2 consecutive life sentences, and while confessing to the murders, he informed the police that he was not of a sound mind, and while committing the crimes, he was extremely intoxicated. He also talked about how he coupled with his wife and all the anger, and for her having an alleged affair with the landlord, and he said that she neglected their children. And the sister-in-law, Leonide, was just guilty because she had a negative influence on his wife and had driven him to commit the murders. So it was meant to be a life sentence and hard labor for Henry in Angola prison, and he ended up only serving 16 years of this life sentence before he ended up escaping. Now, unlike many of those prison break stories that are gruesome and crazy, this one was really not that heightened. So he was running an errand at the post office for the prison, and he literally just called a cab and fled to California. He had that freedom, y'all. This is the 1920s, but I mean, seriously. He was a free man for 2 years, so he was out on the run in 2 years in California before California found out his true identity and returned him to Louisiana. And after serving an additional 2 years there, the convicted double murderer and prison escapee was pardoned by Governor Jimmy Davis. A freaking pardon. What? So he became a free man once again, y'all. And like it always goes, guess what? He was released after the 20 years. He moved to California in 1956, and unable to lay low, he then, guess what, y'all? Attacked another woman. Less than a decade after his parting, he shot his then girlfriend twice in the chest over a fight after money, y'all. And he was sentenced to another 5 years in prison for attempted murder. Just 5 years, y'all. He brutally killed his wife and sister-in-law, chopped them up, put them in a freaking suitcase, escaped, fled to California, came back, got pardoned by the freaking governor, went back to Cali, got this woman, shot her in the chest, and got 5 years. Huh? Where did they do that at? No. Anyways, he got attempted murder for that because guess what? She survived, y'all. And he went to Folsom Prison, where he died of a stroke in 1957. So a quote that Henry said before he died, he said, if he ever got his hands on Joe Corso, he would chop him up to little pieces. Not big pieces like his wife, but little pieces. He would make it look like something that's been run through a sausage mill. That was what Henry stated. So Henry's outlook on the women was that what could they do for him? What could they do for men? That's how women were looked upon from Henry. He said that his wife wouldn't even sweep the stoop, and one reporter is like, what stoop? You lived on the second floor. So it wasn't making sense, y'all. They didn't have many witnesses, and there's always a neighbor with something to say. There's always someone. I mean, hello, this is Louisiana, boo. Everybody has something to say. So the papers lionized him, and he was a poor man who was drove to do this. It was how jealousy turned a devoted husband into a demon because of the alleged affair, y'all. So that's crazy. There's pictures of him with his mother and father in jail, not to mention him cuddling his children. And I'm going to link that in the show notes. But there's a tale involving this case, and it's called The Sausage Ghost Legend. And it was written by Lyle Saxon, who's a renowned author and collector of Louisiana folklore. And it was in a piece known as Gumbo Yaya. And it was a tale about how a man named Hans and his unnamed wife ran a successful sausage business. And it was a difficult trade. And his wife had become just old and like, he just grew out of love with her before her time. And he started looking at another girl because, you know, younger, better, prettier. So he had his eyes set on this other girl. So realizing he had the best disposal method, he pushed his wife into this huge meat grinder in their factory. And he didn't plan on her clothes, and the customers were complaining about odd things in their sausage. Rumors started to spread. Had no one seen his wife in some days, and even this new love that he had got suspicious and broke up with him. So according to this story, he lived and worked at the address some time ago. He was a sausage maker and had his factory with his home. And over the years, he grew tired of his wife and one night just pushed her into the grinder. And one evening, Mr. Mueller was confronted by an angry spirit of his wife, and he was petrified. He was found screaming and hurling. Neighbors contacted authorities and placated them by saying he had a nightmare. After a customer discovered part of a gold wedding band in their sausage, the police were sent to the address again. There, they found Hans Mueller in his factory screaming and crying, a raving maniac. After determining the nature of this crime, he was placed in an asylum where he later committed suicide. So, like I said, this was just a tale. And there was extensive archives that was searched, and there was no Muellers, no sausage company, no grisly deaths about, you know, someone being chopped up in a sausage grinder. And 20 years before this book came out is when the infamous New Orleans truck murders happened. So this is how it all ended up happening. And with that quote from Henry Moity, if he seen the landlord, he would chop him up to little pieces, not like the size of his wife, but smaller. I mean, this is where this tale comes from. But there are two tales that overlap. The wedding band scenario, one found in the sausage, and the other one was literally placed in Theresa's back in a big gash. And today, there's little to distinguish about these 19th century townhouses. And on the subject of the affair that happened within its walls before Halloween, the house is quiet. Tour guides spin tales about paranormal activity here, and there's a co-owner who recently told the Times-Picayune that this place is not haunted. It's a lovely house that unfortunately had this really tragic thing happen in the 1920s. So this is part of the ghost tour in New Orleans. Y'all could go and see it, and it's very interesting. And there's also a book involving this, and I suggest y'all check that out. So if you enjoyed our show, please rate and review us on all your local podcast apps. That's Google, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, and Spreaker, wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to come back next week, as I'm going to cover a human trafficking case. Until then, this is your host, Sarah Soudier, and don't forget to like, share, follow, or subscribe to Criminalist Behavior, a Louisiana true crime podcast. Thank y'all, and I hope y'all enjoy y'all day. Goodbye.